This is a talk I gave recently about the creative process and specifically 5 lessons I've learned about creativity during the course of my career so far, and I wanted to share them with you. So, the first question I think one has to ask is, what is creativity? I started by going to the dictionary and looked up in the Oxford English Dictionary. What is creativity? It's the use of imagination or original ideas to create something, inventiveness, which I didn't find particularly helpful for this. So next I went into Google, a Google image search, and this is what popped out. And frankly, that looks painful. But what it depicts is an explosion of colour and drawings coming out of where presumably somebody's head used to be. And that, again, that doesn't really help me put my finger on what creativity actually is. I mean, it sort of conveys a sense of new things being created, but it doesn't really help, I think. So I find it useful when I define creativity to draw a dichotomy between creativity and productivity. So let's start with productivity. What is productivity? I think productivity is when you go and do something productive, which is that you have a body of work that is well defined and a way of dealing with it that is well defined, and you work your way through it. So, say you work in a call center, or maybe you're a builder following a set of building plans, or maybe you're an airline pilot. And productivity could be all sorts of things. Maybe you're a surgeon doing a heart transplant. It's nothing to do with the level of skill or training that the person's had. It's more sort of an activity that works its way through a predefined or predetermined process. And I want to contrast that with creativity, what I'm going to define as creativity. So imagine, say, an artist or a songwriter or a designer in this case. Now, creative tasks are different in that you don't know how you're going to get to what you're doing, or you don't know what is going to pop out at the end. It's more of an exploratory activity. And another thing that's quite interesting about this, I think, is that if you look at these pictures, you can see that people in productive roles tend to be working in groups as teams, whereas the depictions of creative individuals tend to appear individual. There's one artist, one songwriter, or one designer here, and I think that speaks a certain truth about creativity as well, which is that this is something that I believe that it is a very solitary activity. Collaboration is important and absolutely essential, I think, but the actual process of being creative, I think, is an individual and solo pursuit. That might be controversial, but that's my opinion. So I have my own definition of what creativity is, and that's what I'm going to be talking about when I say creativity in this talk. So, creativity is an abstract, exploratory activity in which the destination or the path to the destination is not predefined. That's my definition of creativity. So, coming to my definition of creativity and what I believe about creativity, I think that the majority of what you do in your life and probably your job is going to be productive activity, not creative. And when you think about it, that makes sense. When you go about your life, you're not inventing a new way to drive a car, for example. If you go out and God forbid if you did, you want to follow the set of rules, and you probably find that your boss wants you to answer emails and not go and write a new program to answer emails in most jobs. I'm trying to think of examples here, but the point is that most of the time you're going to be following predefined steps. And I think most people favor that way of being to not knowing what to do next. I think that most people have that preference. Creativity, and those of us who are creative, have it the other way around. We like being in that space of uncertainty and an infinite possibility. And because it's a preference, I think that it can't actually be taught as such. You can't take somebody and say, okay, here is your process for being creative, because that defies the entire point of being creative. You can't turn it into a process because it's totally unstructured. So you can't actually teach it in the same way that you would teach somebody to answer a call at a call center, for example. But you can improve your ability to be creative, I think. So I think everybody has some capacity to be creative, even if it's not their preference. And what I'm aiming at with this talk is addressing the common sticking points, which I think can be addressed. So that's what these 5 lessons are going to be about. So lesson 1. Lesson 1 is just start. So I'm going to introduce you to the fear of everybody who's ever tried anything creative, like the biggest villain in this story. Yeah, the blank page. So everybody can relate to this. You're sat there sat at your desk or in front of a monitor, and you're looking at a blank page or a blank Word document, and you put no words down. It's sometimes called writer's block. You just don't know what to do, and you'll spend hours just looking at this empty page and thinking, what on earth am I supposed to be doing next? And there are some statements I put here just to highlight this mindset. So I don't know where to start. I need to think this through. And you start procrastinating. Time to have another cup of tea. You do the British thing. And it's been another hour and I've still written nothing. What's happening? And you just go nowhere. And this is quite normal for most people. People think it's something personal and embarrassing, but it's not. It's actually something that's very common amongst creative people. And it's actually got a name, writer's block. You get stuck. And what is it caused by? It's actually caused by fear, I will contend here. It's actually about being terrified of doing the wrong thing, of putting something down onto the paper that isn't good enough or right. So this is how you can actually address this. And if you find yourself getting stuck right at the beginning of any creative project, this is what you can do. You can immediately lower your standards. I like to say, get the first mark on the paper right now. Like if you're supposed to be drawing something, just get a pencil and draw a line that vaguely hints at the sort of thing you're going for. It doesn't matter if it's wrong. And in terms of my writing, when I've done writing in the past, I've actually achieved far more words in a day by using a fountain pen on an old notebook than I have with a word processor. And the reason for that is that I then have to type it up, which means that what I write on the page isn't the finished product, which means that it doesn't need to be perfect. It can be wrong. It's going to be edited. So I lower my standards and I can actually just write what I'm thinking as it happens, and I can actually make a lot of progress. And the same is true with roughing things out in pencil or having a stack of paper and just going through lots and lots of attempts at trying to get the thing you want. Beware perfection. This is very, very important. You can draw first, and then you can improve and edit later on. So that is lesson number 1. Getting started is the hardest thing to do, I think, in creativity. So, well, I'll probably say that again later, but it's very, very difficult. So let's move on to the second lesson. Lesson 2 is it's okay to copy. It's absolutely okay to copy. So why have I said this? Well, another reason that you might get stuck when you're being creative is the desire to do something, quote, original. I have to be original. It has to be all my own work. I have to figure this out for myself. You don't want to be copying somebody else's work or using somebody else's tools. You want to do it all for yourself. And a number of reasons for this. One of this, I think, is probably a level of ego investment in your own ability, which can be quite crippling sometimes. But it's a desire to be absolutely original. It's almost maybe vanity putting so much faith in your own intelligence, your own ability to come up with something that you can't cheat in your own eyes and use somebody else's work. Well, I've got some news for you, which is that copying is how we learn. And all art is derivative. I really believe that. There are no new ideas. And to the extent that people come up with new ideas or new applications for existing ideas, depending on how you want to go on that line of thought, what really matters is you can't start playing around in that higher space until you've worked in the space where other people have almost certainly gone ahead of you and defined a lot of clever ideas that you can use. They're tools, they're right there available to you. So why not use them? So I'll make the argument there are no new ideas. There are only new applications for existing ideas. So I find it also important to draw the distinction between copying and plagiarism. Now, plagiarism is passing off somebody else's work as your own. And that is bad, BAD. You do not want to do that. Don't take credit for other people's work. And what I mean by copying is something a little bit different. Copying is more using what came before as a set of guidelines or a way of moving forward before you add your own nuance or your own twist onto the existing set of ideas. And frankly, all technological advances and all artistic advances, I would argue, have been done in that way. So don't feel any shame by doing that. And in fact, what I would also suggest is if you're going to do that, make sure you just give attribution to who inspired your work, whose tools or concepts you're using. That's perfectly acceptable. Lesson number 3 is to pursue competence. So here's an interesting thing. The guy here in this picture on the left is a man by the name of Frank Whittle. And Frank Whittle was the man who invented the jet engine. Really quite impressive engineer, jet propulsion engineer. He advanced aviation by decades through his work on the jet engine. So how did he become a jet engine engineer? Well, presumably he did engineering at school, and then he went to university, and then he joined the aircraft propulsion establishment, and then he worked his way up through the hierarchy in the aircraft propulsion establishment, and then he decided to do some studies with his team into aircraft propulsion. And anybody who knows about Frank Whittle will know that's simply not the case. What he did was he joined the RAF as an apprentice and built model aircraft. He was not formally trained in the discipline of aircraft propulsion. And this is a very common thing. People who are creative within a discipline are often not formally trained in that discipline. People who are creative tend to be, frankly, a pain in the ass to people who are established in that discipline. They turn up from the outside and they rock the boat. They have new ideas, new ways of doing things that are annoying because they're different. But there's a big however to that, which is that people who are creative within a discipline will also have achieved competence in that discipline. Frank Whittle joined the RAF as an apprentice, but he studied engineering quite meticulously, and he was an extremely accomplished engineer. But a lot of what he did was also self-taught. So it's important to pursue competence in a discipline if you want to make any progress in that discipline, or as Bob Parkinson said in the interview I did with him, if you want to be a painter, you need to paint. Learn your craft. So the person on the right here is Bruce Lee, a fairly well-known martial artist, and I've quoted him here. Through structure, freedom. Practice is absolutely critical. You need to learn how things work within a certain discipline. You need to learn that craft. And you need to learn the rules before you start breaking them. Creativity is all about breaking rules, but you can't break rules competently if you don't know what they are. So pursue competence. That's my third rule. This is probably my favourite rule, my favourite lesson. Lesson number 4, you know almost nothing. And here we enter the realm of what's called the knowledge problem. So imagine that here's you in the middle of a sea of people that I'm using to represent the world. And you've been given a task. Maybe you're a designer and you've been asked to design something. So here you are in your little bubble, and you've got your education and you've got all your books and knowledge, and you conceive of in your mind, this is how things work. You use all of that knowledge and education to conceive of the perfect solution to your problem. And then all you need to do is give it out to people, and everybody will be thinking, ooh, wow, it's amazing. What a diamond of an idea. Well, anybody who's actually done anything in the real world will tell you exactly what happens next, which is that it all goes up in smoke because inevitably you won't have thought of something, it won't work. And this is why it's a problem of information. There is information out there that you don't have. And it might not be academic information or training or anything like that. It's just real world information that is out there that you don't have. And that's why your thing didn't work. So here I bring in an economist by the name of F.A. Hayek. And he talked about the knowledge problem. It's also known as the problem with experts. The problem with experts is knowledge is distributed and difficult to get hold of. And I'm not talking about academic knowledge, I'm talking about real world knowledge. So, for example, you might know everything about some application that you've got to address, like, I don't know, maybe you've got to design a valve or something. But the problem is that the guy down in the workshop who operates the lathe, who's got to make the parts for that valve, knows things that you don't. And to make it even more fun, that person probably doesn't even know that it's things that you don't know. We have to accept that this is a problem with design and, frankly, with creativity in general, which is that you don't know what you don't know. And this is why the best things are actually evolved rather than designed. And any technology, you can look at a technology's evolution. Nobody ever designs, going back to Frank Whittle, he didn't design the ultimate jet engine straight out. In fact, he purposefully kept the design simple to start with so that they could learn lessons. And that's what I'm going to suggest here. So I'm going to suggest an alternate process where here you are in your bubble, and instead of turning to your education and to your knowledge, what you do is you draw a first draft and you distribute it. And when you distribute it, the information then becomes apparent because people will look at your first draft and say, okay, well, that's got problems here, or maybe you could improve this. And you'll have invested a fraction of the amount of time into that first draft. But that then allows you to conceive of a much better solution with the feedback that you've got from your first attempt. So coming back to almost nothing, don't be afraid of failure. Don't be afraid of getting something wrong. Obviously be safe. Don't don't test the safety mechanism on a nail gun by pointing it at your arm. But when you are being creative, you have to go with your instincts and shoot from the hip and expect that you're going to be a little bit wrong, that you're going to have to draw that line a second time, or that you're going to have to delete part of that sentence and replace some of the words. And some of that will be from looking at it yourself and thinking, maybe that's not quite right when you come back to edit. But also, you can learn from feedback from other people. Which brings us to my fifth and final lesson. So, lesson 5 is, it's not you. And I'll explain what I mean by that. It's not you means it's not you that's being criticized. It's your work. And this is a common reason why people are afraid of sharing their work. They're afraid that they will be criticized and the criticism reflects badly on them. And I'll also mention the fear of losing possession of your work and other people making changes to it. And it's all wrapped up in your ego, your sense of self, which I'm going to argue is actually your worst enemy. You aren't what you create. The thing that you created is just a reflection of what you were and not what you are or what you can be. So negative feedback about your creation isn't negative feedback about you necessarily. And being able to decouple your ego, I would say, as a creative individual, is the most valuable thing that you can do. Because once you can do that, you can take people's feedback and you can use that to improve your work and make it even better. And the other thing I would say is that all but the tiniest of projects require working with other people, require their input. So allowing other people to shine as well and make changes to your work, to make your work better, is actually a great way to learn and to become better. And it might even be from subordinates. If you're somebody who's got a lot of experience, going back to the knowledge problem, the intern in the office who's making the coffee might spot something that you have missed by asking a question that just hasn't occurred to you, for example. So you do have to learn to trust the skills of other people and their judgments as well. As I say, the most important thing to take away from this, I think, is to decouple criticism of you from criticism of your work. Don't take any criticism of your work personally, because it's not a criticism of you. It's not you. So, to summarize, just start, just get going, just make the first mark on the paper. That's the most important thing when you're being creative. Remember that it's okay to copy other people, as long as you give attribution, and remembering that copying is the way that you'll learn. Remember that you have to pursue competence. If you want to improvise piano jazz solos, then maybe you have to do the boring work of playing scales, for example. Remember that you know absolutely almost nothing. Remember the knowledge problem and be willing to take feedback. Be willing to put information out there, incomplete ideas out there, so that you can get feedback and use that to improve your work. And finally, remember, decouple your sense of self from criticism of your work, because your work is not you. So, thanks for listening, and I hope you have a great day.